Hello and welcome to the introduction video for the VP Networks Gateway Controller NC-3610. The intention of this video is maybe this is your first out-of-box experience, or maybe it's a product that you need to support for a site that you're taking over. But this is going to serve as an overall overview and also some details on where different settings are and what to configure. But first, as an introduction, the gateway controller NC-3610 is a router that's used to control public access. And really, the intention of the product is to minimize complaints and maximize accessibility in a public network. In a public network, you have no control over who's coming to the network. It's something like a hotel. You have no control over what kind of equipment the guests are bringing. So in that way, it's different than an enterprise network. And so the gateway controller has a lot of features that are focused around getting people's equipment to work, no matter how it's set up, as well as preventing users who maybe have a virus or maybe have a spam bot or maybe they are a spammer. You just really never know who's going to show up on your network. The gateway controller also controls access to the network so that you can ensure that the people who you want to serve are getting access and other people in the environment, people just visiting in the lobby, people walking by on the street, do not have access or maybe have limited access. The other thing that the gateway controller is designed to do is to support a business model. Maybe you want to charge for access, or maybe you want to have access codes that give different amounts of access to different users. So there's a tremendous amount of functionality in the gateway controller to allow you to enforce a business model, whether it's a charged access, postpaid, prepaid, free access. Really, there's any number of business models that could be supported. And the final intention for the gateway controller is for it to be both easy to use for users who do not have a lot of experience configuring network devices, but also having a deep layer of complexity, particularly for users who have a very specific business model or have a very specific set of requirements that they need to support in order to get approval. Particularly hotels often have a brand specification that has to be met. So taking your gateway controller NC-3610 out of the box at the default configuration, you could literally just plug it in. So the WAN port is set to DHCP by default. The security is set to automatic authentication by default. So in many circumstances, DHCP is on by default. If you just plug in your laptop to the LAN port, you should get an address and have access to the internet in most cases. For more of kind of a quick start of things that you might want to set up for the most basic configuration, the first thing you would do is configure the WAN port. This is what you have connected to your ISP. You probably don't need to change the LAN network unless you have a specific network that you need to support. Really all you need to configure here is configure the bandwidth that your ISP is providing. This is important because the gateway controller controls bandwidth based on requests by users, so you need to tell it how much is available. Otherwise, what will happen is it will send too much bandwidth to your ISP, and your ISP will drop the extra. The other setting you need to configure is, by default, it's set to DHCP. If you have a static IP address, put that in. In this case, you can see it's a private address. I have this behind another device, but this would probably be a static IP from your network service provider. And that's really all you need to configure on the WAN side. The next thing that you would configure is configure your security authentication. You can set this to local authentication, just to use like a guest account, or also terms of service is very simple to use. Um, the third thing you would need to configure is figure out what you want your login page to look like. Um, if you use the internal portal page, that's a page you can upload. The default page will just give you a very simple text page that you can use. And you can see you can add a little text as well. That's very simple to set up. And then the final thing you need to do for your most basic setup is upload a banner file. When you upload this banner file, then that will give you a branded page. So if we want to take a look at this, we can log out real quick. And so this is the banner that I was talking about. So you replace that with your banner or a hotel banner or a cafe banner. And then we'll log back in. Here's that default authentication page. It still has our banner on it, but if you change it to your banner, this would give you a very simple setup. So it's really as quick as that. Now, more in depth, you'll need to decide exactly, which features on the gateway controller that you want to use. And so the best thing to do there, as always, is take a look at the product manual. It has information on every setting. It has example setups, how to use different setups. The other thing you could use for a more in-depth understanding of the product is view some of the other video tutorials. This tutorial is intended to be just introductory. It's not going to go in depth into these features and how to use them. It's really just to talk about where they are and what they do in the broadest sense. But as we go through this introduction, I'll point out places where there are more detailed video tutorials that you could view on particular subjects. So here on the network system page, we have general system properties. That includes an IP address filter you can use if you want to block certain incoming IP addresses. Make sure you don't forget which IP addresses you set here. If you forget the incoming IP addresses that are allowed, you'll have to reset the unit to default. There isn't any way around that. You can set a NAS ID if you're using Radius or using it for some other reason. Under the LAN IP settings, you can control the status of the ports. So you can enable port isolation so that the ports don't talk to each other, or you can have two ports that do talk to each other. The private port will not send any traffic to the other ports. Auto IP is a feature that will allow machines that are not configured for DHCP often to connect if they have a static IP address from their house, or if they're stuck on some other network and they're not accepting a local address. This won't work for those 169 addresses you see sometimes in Windows because those addresses don't have a valid gateway. But any address that has a valid gateway should work with this auto IP feature. Auto LAN isolation will allow you to block communication between the guests on a network. This works through blocking of ARP messages. So it is a technology that's best effort. If you have devices that are connected through a switch further downstream, or guests that are connected to an AP, that traffic may not be seen by the controller, so it may not be blocked. In that case, you'll want to use additional switches or access points that have their own isolation technology. This will work for any traffic that the gateway controller sees. If you want to control the hours that the gateway is accessible, you can configure hours of service. This can be useful for things like a guest lobby or a library. You can set the calendar on the unit to a different a different NTP server if you want. By default, it kind of goes to a generic time server. If you're finding that you're having to manually restart the gateway controller because it's getting overloaded or because other equipment is getting out of sync, if you're finding that that's something that you have to do, you can set a scheduled reboot to automatically trigger a reboot. In most cases, this isn't necessary, but sometimes it can be helpful. And in certain configurations, you may want to kick everyone off the network at a certain time of day, and this could be used for that purpose as well. Because when the gateway controller reboots, all the current sessions will be terminated. The idle timeout will determine when guests are logged out for being idle. You could set this number to 60 minutes or an hour, or some people set it to 24 hours or a week or longer. Just keep in mind that if you set a very long time, that those current users will never be removed until that time passes, particularly if you are using a gateway controller that has a limit for the number of current users. Keep in mind that these idle users will use up one of those slots until they get logged out. If you're getting reports of people being kicked off the network or getting login pages unexpectedly, this can be a place to check to see if they're idle and they're getting a login page, and maybe this time needs to be longer. You can also set the number of packets that determines whether someone is idle. Again, you may have a configuration that requires this. WAN/LAN we looked at briefly. You can set up the primary LAN network. You can also set up an alias network, which means that the gateway controller will provide a gateway IP on that subnet as well. So for instance, in this configuration, we have a 168.1 subnet. We also have a 168.128 subnet. So any traffic from either of those subnets would be correctly routed by the gateway controller. There are some limitations in that some of the more proprietary features, like the auto IP, only work on the primary LAN network, not on the alias subnets. So often alias subnet is used for equipment on the network, like access points or cameras or other equipment that you don't want to be so easily seen from the guest network. You can set the gateway up for PPPoE. It's not that common anymore, but if you still have that system, static IP is the most common. For the subscriber bandwidth limit, you can choose how the limits will appear in the interface. So you can define custom bandwidth profiles, or you can use the standard profiles that are provided. And either you can use asymmetrical, meaning your bandwidth profiles will be 8 megabits by 1 megabit, or 5 megabits by 512, or symmetrical where they're the same. This will depend on your ISP connection. Some connections are symmetrical. If you have something more like a DSL or a cable, that'll tend to have a lot more download than it has upload. If you're finding you have a lot of file sharing or other session-based problems where users are opening up a tremendous number of connections, you can set the session control here. We don't recommend setting this to much below 100, because even somebody just running a regular laptop may have a lot of open sessions. But setting this to 100 will prevent a file sharer from opening up thousands of simultaneous connections. Using the bandwidth limits, it's usually not required, but that's a feature that you can use. There's support for VLAN as well. If you're using a VLAN configuration, you can configure your VLAN here. The gateway controller doesn't do port-based isolation by VLAN. The VLAN IDs are more used for tracking room numbers or getting information about guests, often there's a VLAN ID for each room number, and then in the tracking of users and in the user reports, you can see the VLAN IDs to see who was doing what in what room. So if you're interested in looking at the speed on your system, or you're not sure how to set this WAN port mode, there is a more detailed video tutorial on speed tests and what to expect from your gateway controller. It also includes information about the link aggregator, the BA4100. So take a look at the BA4100 speed test video if you're interested in issues around speed tests and how to check your links. In addition, there's also a video tutorial that goes more in depth into bandwidth control and how to use the different features that are on the gateway controller. So you might want to take a look at that as well. There's an NC-3610 bandwidth control video that's more in depth on that topic. On the server tab, you can configure the DHCP server. By default, the gateway will provide DHCP services on the LAN port. You can disable that. You can also you can have the controller check more aggressively for DHCP conflicts. Usually these conflicts are the responsibility of the clients to detect, but if you are getting reports of DHCP conflicts, that's a feature that you can enable. You can also assign static leases to guests if that's required. Static leases can be useful for devices that don't have a web browser, like Xboxes or other kinds of entertainment devices. If you give them a static IP address, you can then add that to the pass-through table, and then that guest can connect, and they don't have to worry about trying to log in or you trying to connect them manually. You can set up 2 gateway controllers to load balance. So a 3610 supports probably a maximum of 1,000 to 1,200 concurrent users. If you have a larger network than that, or you need to split a network for some reason, you can configure load balancing here, and the 2 units will split up the available guests. This might be a place to take a look at the manual for more details on how to set up your 2 units. HTTP auto proxy is another proprietary feature that will serve web pages even if the guest has a proxy configured. This is often true for enterprise customers. You can also redirect SMTP emails to your SMTP server if you need to handle email traffic. And this isn't needed that typically, but that is a feature you can use. Another area to be aware of is the web server. You can configure the web server to be SSL based. You can also decide whether or not to redirect customer SSL requests. So if a customer requests an encrypted web page, like their Gmail page, under normal circumstances, a gateway won't be able to redirect that traffic. It requires some proprietary handling. So if you want customer web requests that are SSL based to be redirected, you can enable it here. Keep in mind that it uses a substitute web SSL certificate, so those guests will always receive a warning that the SSL certificate has been substituted. There's no way around that. The other option is just that they'll get a blank screen, so you kind of have to pick the behavior that you want. For debugging purposes, you can also see the routing tables. You can add routes if your configuration requires that. Also, you can see the ARP table. This can be useful if people say they're not connected, or they're not getting DHCP, or you're having other kinds of network problems. You can create persistent ARP messages. Sometimes this helps with switches that for whatever reason are not adding an ARP entry for devices. You can create a static entry here. Generally, that's not required, but that is an option that you have. So that basically covers the network configuration. Um, the next area is security. Here's another place where there's a very in-depth video to cover all the security options. Just high level, you can use a Radius server. You'll know how to configure that if you're interested in Radius. Local authentication will use a local username. And by default, it's guest, but you can add whatever username you want. You can use a terms of service page, which is just a text page with a button you click on that says you agree to the terms. Automatic is the default, where everyone is automatically logged in. It does still require an HTTP request by the guest, so it may not work for things like Xboxes, just depending on what kind of traffic they're sending. You can also connect your gateway controller to a PMS system, Micros or Galaxy. And in addition, you can use email-based authentication where guests will enter their email addresses and you can collect those. That can be useful for public sites if you want to contact guests later or just have an idea of who's logging in. You can also create pass-through addresses. These are mostly, you can create this for equipment on your network that you need to pass through the authentication system. Also, if you have guests who can't get a login page, or like again that Xbox, can't open up the login page or agree to any kind of terms, you can add them here as pass-through entries. Customization is where you can configure mostly the look and feel of the authentication system, what kind of messages people will get, how the login pages look. We talked about this default login page. You can also use internal portal. You can upload your own page with whatever graphics and images you want on it. You can also redirect to an external portal that you host. And this is a place where customers have implemented extremely complex authentication systems with automatic credit card billing and all kinds of functionality, differentiated services based on location in the network or multiple sites connected to a single server. So there's a lot of functionality here if you want to use your own portal page hosted on your web server. You can also use a login pop-up. This gets blocked by a lot of devices, so we don't generally recommend that. If you want to connect your device to social media, so this is especially good for something like a hotel that has a Twitter account and a Facebook account and TripAdvisor reviews. This is a feature you can use to create some social media links on the page, so hopefully people will give you some reviews or tell them that they like your Facebook page. The other behavior you can control is what happens after guests connect. So that's the post authentication behavior. So you can use a welcome page by default. You can also redirect them to an internal page that says welcome or has some information. You can specify a URL on the internet if you have a landing page of some kind, or if it is a restaurant chain that has a corporate page. They might want guests to land here once they enter the access code. If you want to give free access for a limited time to non-users of the network, this can be useful for something like a cafe or a hotel lobby where you want to give people an hour or a couple hours of access. You can enable that here. So if we enable this for 60 minutes, then anyone who connects to the system can get 60 minutes of access. They'll just, where the username password entry is, there'll be an additional field that says get limited free access, or you can use a different link if you want. And then after 60 minutes, they'll get a countdown timer. And once that time is up, they'll need to wait the reset period, of a day or whatever amount you want to set before they can connect again using that link. Of course, they can always log in with their access code or with their username password. This is just for people who don't have a username password. CNA bypass. So there's a feature on Apple devices called Captive Network Assistant that opens up a little mini browser Depending on what you're using for your login page, this can cause a lot of problems. So if you want to prevent that mini browser from launching, you can enable this feature. In that case, Apple users will have to go to a real website. They'll have to open up Safari or some other website. If they just go to iTunes, they'll get a message saying that they're not connected to the network. So this is a feature. Make sure you really understand how it's going to change the behavior of Apple devices before you enable it. It's certainly required for some configurations, or if you're having problems with Apple users connecting, we've heard that enabling this sometimes resolves the problem. Preventing CNA from launching in other cases can cause more problems. So make sure you understand this feature if you are going to use it. Don't just enable it because it sounds cool, even though it is pretty cool. So message customization, these are mostly status messages. If you blacklisted users, you can customize a message for them. If you're using the logout window, that's a pop-up that shows their time remaining. You can customize that here. Keep in mind the pop-ups often get blocked by the web browsers. Also, if you want to redirect users when they log out, you can do that as well. Again, using a standardized page, an internal page you upload, or you can redirect them to some kind of a page to give them a goodbye message. So here's the other customization area we looked at. This is where our banner was that we uploaded. As you can see, there's a pretty full selection of files here that you can replace with custom files. If you're using, here's the internal portal page we talked about. Here's the goodbye page. There's a welcome page as well. But so if you want to customize one of these pages, all you need to do is just choose a local file with the same file name, upload it, and then you'll overwrite the internal portal or other file that's in here now. You can also upload a ton of your own files. It looks like there's about almost 40 megabytes free. This is compressed as well, so if you do upload some files, you'll find out you can squeeze more than the just 40 megabytes in there. But if you have image files or as elaborate a website as you want, you can upload it here. Finally, if you want to serve advertisements, you can also do that. You can do that using a timer or just based on links. So the management menu primarily shows information about the gateway controller itself or usage by users. You can enable SNMP if you're an SNMP user. You'll know about that if you're an SNMP user. Connection logging is a way that you can record the TCP sessions of all your guests. And that file is too large to be stored internally, so you need to export it to a TFTP server. We have a hosted TFTP server you could use. If not, you can host it yourself. The files are comma separated CSV files, so they're easy to use if you want to see what guests are doing. You can also set up the AP monitor to monitor your access points. Once you enter them here, it'll give you a port forward to the access point. Also, it'll give you a status to tell you whether the access point is up or down. You can also use these fields to do port forwarding, or if you need to map internal and external ports, you can do that as well. Port forwarding can get tricky between devices, so there is a video tutorial about using the BA4100 with the NC-3610 specific to port forwarding. So do take a look at that video if you're not familiar with port forwarding or if you have any questions of how to set it up. But it's pretty straightforward to do port forwarding. You can also get syslog output from the gateway controller. You can configure that here and get network messages about usage, or can be useful for debugging. If you do have a support case, we may ask you to turn this on so we can see what's going on your gateway controller. You can also see reports. This is where you enable the feature to show reports of guest usage, and those get saved for about 90 days on the gateway controller. You can see everyone who logged in and logged off and what they did. This is another place where there's a detailed video on using reporting on the gateway controller, and also our report portal where we can store all that information for you. So for more information, do take a look at the in-depth video tutorial for reporting. Advanced is kind of a catch-all of kind of some of the more esoteric features. If you want to use dynamic DNS, you can set that up here. If you need GRE or VPN tunnels, you'll know what those are. You can set up, GRE is a little bit easier to set up, but you'll need a GRE terminator in Linux or a device that supports that. Or you can set up a VPN tunnel using IPsec. Configure your IPsec settings here. Supports up to 10 tunnels. There's also a packet filter. If you find that you want to block certain ports or certain kinds of traffic, you can set up the packet filter here. There's also a spam filter that will control the number of SMTP connections. So 10 connections per minute means if somebody sends more than 10 emails in a minute, that some of those emails will get queued. At that point, it's up to their email server in terms of what happens to those. They might get dropped. They might just be delayed, but you can configure this. If someone does end up getting blocked, you can see in a blacklist, it'll show you who's been blocked from sending emails. It's nobody at the moment. So traffic control is a way to deal with file sharers and video watchers and other people who maybe are using a lot of bandwidth that you don't want them to use. And what this does is allows you to assign that traffic to a smaller data pool. So most of your good traffic, your emails, your web surfing, can be assigned to a high priority pool, and then those other kinds of traffic, file sharing and videos and other things, can be assigned to a lower priority pool. There's a detailed video on this as well, dealing with file sharers and how to configure traffic control. Do take a look at that if you're interested in more details on what to do about file sharing and what your options are. If you need to provide static IP addresses to VPN users because they're having problems with NAT, you can configure that here. You can either distribute those automatically by letting people click on a button that says, I need a static IP address, or you can have them configure it manually. If you are having problems with multiple connections to the same VPN server, this might happen with corporate groups where they're trying to all connect back to a single corporate server. It may only allow one connection per site. So if you enter in a block of addresses here, if you enter in 10 addresses, then they'll be able to create 10 connections to their corporate server. This is a requirement for some applications. Usually a combination of these two is what you want. A few static IPs for legacy VPNs that need static IPs, and then automatic IPs for more modern VPNs that just have limited connections per site restrictions on them. That can give you a good VPN solution. So in system status, you can see what's going on with your gateway, basic information about firmware, who's connected. You can connect your number of user status here. This unit is only licensed for 50 users. If you have more, you'll see this reflected here. There's also a bandwidth graph you can look at to see what's going on your network. You can view that by number of users connected. It's not too much on this test machine. Or you can look at LAN or WAN traffic. This is covered in the bandwidth control tutorial, so look there for more information. You can also see the number of current users Oh, it doesn't look like I'm logged. Let me log in. Then we'll have a current user. So this is connected to your number of users here, 1 out of 50. So here's our one user. So when we were talking about the idle timeout, that was a place where that's where these two are connected. So if I stay idle, I'm going to be using up these system licenses. So DHCP clients just shows leases that have been issued. It doesn't mean these people are logged in. It doesn't mean they're current users on the network. It just means a lease was issued to them. For instance, here's a lease from a week ago. Who knows where this person is? Maybe they're a user or not. So if you see a lot of DHCP clients here, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It just means that people took leases. One useful feature here is if you know the lease of a device, like say we know this is an Xbox based on the IP address or the MAC address, and they're having trouble connecting, we can click on this pass-through button to automatically add a pass-through entry for them, and that way they won't have to log in. So that can be useful for your Xboxes or other devices. This connection tracker will show you all the TCP connections. Mostly that's for debugging. Here's that AP table that we set up. This will show all your access points in it and give you a link you can click on if you want to see it. This is the status of your VPN tunnels, if you've configured that. If you've enabled the syslog, you can see syslog messages. You can see in here it's not all that helpful, a lot of these messages, mostly for debugging. We talked about enabling the reports. So here's where the reports appear. There's not many users on this system, so we don't have too much in the reports. But on a busy site, you'll see your 100,000 users in this report, and you can look at and see, how long they were connected, why they were terminated, how much data they sent. This can be useful for reviewing who's doing what on your network. Also, you could use it for postpaid billing as well. There is a more detailed video on how to use the reports and exactly what kind of information you can get out of them, so do take a look at that if you're interested. And then this is just another link to that bandwidth graph that we looked at. So under system tools are things like if you need to upgrade the firmware, if you need to load your license. That's something I should have mentioned. If you are taking your device out of the box for the first time, you may have a license that you need to install. You can also export the current configuration. That's useful if you need to reset the unit for some reason. The configuration comes out as a text file in XML, so it's easy to edit if you want to have a standardized customization across multiple sites. It's easy to export the configuration from one unit and make a few changes to it. You can also import a user database, or if you have a lot of pass-through addresses, you can load those in an XML file as well. If you have your own SSL certificate that you want to use, you can upload that here as well. Admin is just going to control your passwords, and factory settings is if you want to reset to factory. So that pretty much covers the introduction to the NC-3610. There is some information in the help, answers a few questions. There's an index that's useful if you can't remember where the syslog configuration is, or you don't remember where the ARP table is. So the interface can be complicated, so the index is helpful, and if you click on the restart button, it'll just offer to restart. So please do take a look at the more in-depth tutorials, or contact us at support@valuepointnet.com. Let us know if you have any additional questions, and thank you for your time.